Bring it down! Boil and toil and trouble and bubbling. Yeah, get them. Put them in the boiling pot. I'm very confused. I've got a bit flustered and hot and carried away with the sort of social, cultural death sentence applied to people. I've very much enjoyed it. It's been a great and confusing week. And hello, I'm Joe Devine. Welcome to the Tifo Football Podcast. We'll be talking today, of course, about the downfall of the Super League, a very funny thing that happened. Lots of funny things to talk about. So we're going to enjoy that, analysing the fall, thinking about the future, what the consequences could be. Could the government be involved? Reflecting as well on how poorly it was launched. And also, we talk a little bit about Spurs and Southampton at the very end of the podcast too. A short, shrifty bit of football for listeners who are interested in that sort of thing. And I'm joined today in order to do that by Seb Stafford-Bloor.
Hello, Joe Devine.
And Alex Stewart.
Morning.
Morning. It was a fun episode to record, wasn't it? One thing, do you know what? One thing I forgot to say that I meant to say in today's episode at some point, didn't have a natural home, was well done to Gary Neville. You know, not because he did anything individually that was, you know, so purposeful as to have an impact on this movement, although I'm sure it's possible that he did, but because when they look back on this movement in the future, or this moment, in the future, it's going to be his clips that they use, isn't it? In the documentaries and in the, you know, in the radio shows and the films or whatever it is that they make to talk about this. Even just quoting him in articles, like, it's going to be Gary Neville quotes that they use, isn't it?
Yeah, as long as it's not James Corden, that's kind of good with me. Yeah,
but James Corden had his say. It was good. When I saw that, I thought, oh, good, don't worry, James Corden said something.
Oh, look, I see a bandwagon leaving the station.
Oh, I think James. I'm no fan of James Corden, but he's a legit West Ham fan. But the best bit about that was at the end when he just sort of said, "I know none of you care, but I do."
There was no audience response, was there?
Nothing at all. He just poured himself out for 3.5 minutes to basically a blank wall.
Yes, true. Anyway, well, today's episode is full of fun, I think. Right, that's all. I will leave you today in the warm hands and the cool embrace of Joel Glazer and Daniel Levy and who are the other people? Stan Kroenke.
Other terrible people.
Bruce Buck and Roman Abramovich.
John Henry not taking off his coat.
John Henry with a coat on. Andrea Agnelli and Florentino Perez and some other people at some of the other clubs too. You know, I'll leave you in all of their hands.
Don't think Judas was involved.
Where else to begin but with the Super League, the failed Super League, the fallen Super League, the turns out to be very extremely funny Super League week. Seb, what an embarrassment, wasn't it? It was a real embarrassment.
It was just 12 super clubs trying to save the world, Joe. Trying to save all the poor clubs, trying to make sure that everybody in the game had just as much money as they needed. And it was just pure benevolence. What a shame. Yeah. What a shame. Yeah.
Well, you know, good guys finish last, don't they?
They do indeed. And nothing proves that more than this as an experiment. This is kind of like a literal parable. Yeah.
Yeah. My favourite thing, Alex, about this whole process was as the English clubs started to drop off, the order in which they dropped off being extremely important to them was very funny. The messages which they would eventually send their fans was very funny. The way that the final 4 English clubs appeared to coordinate their exit from the European Super League. Not sure if they did, but all of their social media accounts, released statements around the same minute after 11. And then in the days since, some of the very, very funny videos and letters from these people who are just saying things that are just not true. About how they feel.
John Henry perched on his stool like the Jerry Springer final thought, saying how terribly sad he is. But there's, I don't know, the climb down has been as unedifying as the spectacle itself in the first place, hasn't it? Because the apologies in inverted commas have kind of, switched from, in some instances, being actual apologies. We listened to you, we are sorry for what happened, right through to basically yeah, well, that's not happening anymore. I think it makes it very difficult for some of these clubs to begin to repair the fractured relationships that they've got with a significant element of their fan base, and it's been handled woefully from start to finish.
Well, repair being the key word there, Alex, you're spot on, because, of course, Joel Glazer used the word repair in his statement to Manchester United fans, apologising, saying that he hopes they can rebuild the relationship. He didn't use the word repair, did he? I've just realised as I've said it out loud, he used the word rebuild, but it's the same kind of word. Rebuild, repair. He said he wanted to rebuild the relationship with United fans, which never existed. So,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the Glazers are perhaps the only club that genuinely had, up until that point, a relatively decent ownership fan group relationship was FSG at Liverpool. Because obviously they have achieved a lot. Otherwise, you feel like there's been a kind of uneasy standoff in a lot of instances, and continued outright hostility, particularly in the case of Manchester United, also in the case with Arsenal. So in a lot of these instances, there's nothing to rebuild in the first place. It's just kind of confirmed the worst fears of a large section of those fans anyway.
Well, the Liverpool FSG relationship is, I mean, it wasn't actually that good beforehand. I mean, the title made a difference. Winning the European Cup has kept people quiet, but there was a lot of anger over the furloughing decision back in last summer.
But it's a much shorter term thing, isn't it? I mean, the furloughing thing was bad, trying to copyright Liverpool was bad, but these are relatively recent things. I was staggered to read somebody, I can't remember who said it, but I'd forgotten how long the Glazers had been in charge of Manchester United.
Yeah, for sure.
I was kind of staggered by that.
16 years.
Right, exactly. And in that period, I think this is the second public statement that that Joel Glazer himself has made. What that's not a relationship with a fan group.
No, it certainly isn't. Here's two things from me. One, I don't believe any of it. I assume something went wrong that caused them to turn around. For some reason, the money disappeared or whatever. Perhaps fan groups scared off crucial sponsorships or crucial broadcasters. But I don't believe that it was just the reaction that caused these people to change their minds, because why would they, right? Thoughts on that, please, Seb?
Yeah, it's just a lie. It's how many times have club statements begun with, we've listened to the reaction, or we were taken aback by the vociferousness of the response.
We were surprised.
We just couldn't believe it. And you just think, this is fine, but part of the reason why there's so much surprise and why some of these owners at least feign to be taken aback is because nobody asks in the first place. No one sort of gathers a fan group and says, what do you reckon about this? Because if they had done, this would have been the response. I suppose what I can't really get away from is whenever I read one of these statements, and let's not go down the tribal route of, oh, my club is shitter than yours at apologies, because who cares? They're all bang to rights. John Henry may have said a lot of things. John Henry didn't even take his coat off when he recorded his statement. He literally just sat down somewhere.
It was the Tim Sherwood gilet,
oh,
wasn't it?
Mate, just at least look like you've gone through about an hour's worth of preparation rather than just being shoved in front of the camera and mumble through an autocue and then leave. It's just, how stupid do you think supporters are? Your players revolted against you. Presumably some commercial partners said that might not be in their interest. Even Amazon said, hold on now. This
I
is
think
Jeff
that's
Bezos.
the one, isn't it?
That's the one.
I think that's the one. Like, I think that's. I don't know. Just to clarify, don't actually know. But I know. But that would be to do with supporter response, because if Amazon, went whoa now as a result of, it would be as a result of the supporter response, right?
I don't know. I think it would have been probably as a result of mass media response. I mean, if you're talking about supporters in the sense of people demonstrating outside grounds and hanging scarves.
That leads back to people, though, right? That leads back to people in the
does, but I don't know that it's about I don't know if it's about sort of match going public. I think when you start having prime ministers talk about it in the House of Commons, that's problematic.
Amazon don't
for
want to get
companies.
involved in that.
Yeah, probably not. Yeah,
hypothetically.
And I think you also have that there was a significant media response in and of itself. Journalists themselves were very critical. Pundits were very critical. There was an interesting Grace Robertson, who's a writer I really like, who does a newsletter, put one out last night and made a very astute point, which is that a lot of the sponsors involved in sport, you know, if you look at Nike or whomsoever, have been moving much towards this kind of we're in this together, we care about you, we're also interested in, you know, civil rights and don't get me wrong, they're still a corporation, they're still trying to sell you trainers, but the marketing pivot has been much more towards being inclusive and caring and fighting people's corner. And so the European Super League kind of decided to push itself forward at a time when pretty much every significant football sponsor is trying to talk about stuff in a different way. However cynically they're doing that, it's that, you know, breaking away for the purposes of becoming richer very much goes against the general messaging of brands at the moment.
I have a little bit of breaking news for you guys, actually, just because we are news relevant on this podcast. A large group of Manchester United fans are blocking at the entrances to Carrington this morning in protest against the Glazers' management of the club, or ownership of the club.
Get in there, fans. Block
Good
those
for you.
roads.
Good for you.
Who were they stopping?
Yeah.
The
players from coming into training, yeah.
Players don't need to train. They're pretty good, aren't they?
Exactly that. Yeah.
Well, do you know what? I applaud them doing something. I think it's nice. I would also say there's a fine, not in relation to these Manchester United supporters, don't misunderstand me, but goodness me, isn't there a fine line between getting all excited and then getting hell-bent with mob rule? Oh, on Sunday, on Monday, I could have burned some people alive. You know? I really had to sit back and go, whoa now. I just enjoyed the climb down. That's all. Anyway, hopefully the climb down will be even greater because there'll be some significant consequences that come as a result of this really bad misunderstanding of what they could actually do. Of course, the first place that we might stop on our journey of consequences land is perhaps the least likely one, is the government are promising a review of the game, which the review will happen, right? Tracy Crouch will do a root and branch investigation into the governance of football and what we can do to promote the roles of fans in that governance. Lots of people have talked about 50+1. Obviously, as you mentioned already, Alex and Seb, the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, was talking about it. Lots of MPs have been involved in tweeting about it, at least over the last few days. So there's appetite for some kind of discussion. And the most, interesting thing to me about the whole process was that, Bayern Munich weren't allowed to join because of their 50+1 rule. It just seems like a great idea. What is the appetite here?
I like 50+1. I would stop short of presenting it as an absolute paradise. I think if you look at German football at the moment, the temptation is just to see the clubs who benefit from it and who are run well as a result of it. There's an awful lot of dysfunction in German football. I mean, look at what's happened to Schalke, for instance. Look at the arguments that have engulfed Stuttgart. Look at the ownership and running of Hamburg over the last decade or so. 50+1 is fine. I think what matters is the people in the club, because decisions still have to be taken. And even if you look at fan-run teams in the UK, there are more than a few examples of that initial honeymoon period where it's all great and democracy is wonderful, and then there's always a falling out. I think of like some of the controversies that sort of sunk FC United of Manchester a few years ago.
Yeah.
It still depends on smart people in the right positions. It's a great starting point because I think it protects you from things like this. That's very, very important. But this is a kind of nuclear level catastrophe. You also have to look at kind of your day-to-day, your normal stuff. And it's not a silver bullet solution.
What's normal stuff in your war analogy?
I suppose negotiation of television rights and how revenue is distributed.
No, in the war analogy, I'm asking.
Oh, in the war analogy. I mean, I don't know, a little skirmish on a beach.
A beach skirmish.
Take that town. Like
Take
in
that town, the replica town of Take That in China.
No. You remember in Band of Brothers when they're coming out of the Battle of the Bulge, and they have to take an occupied town, and that colonel, that bad colonel, Norman Dyke, he loses it on the battlefield, and he has to be relieved of his command mid-movement.
That's the one where Spears runs through the town.
Spears is just like I don't even know how you describe Spears, because there's some fairly...
Producer Adonis has texted us in the middle of our really fun conversation, Seb, to remind us of our duty to explain what the 50+1 rule is. Thanks, producer Adonis.
We're always ruining that fun, isn't he? Always. Yeah. It's just
he's
like
trying to come down on it hard. Yeah.
So in Germany, the football clubs are arms of sports clubs, general sports clubs, which contain teams which do all sorts of things: handball and fencing, and gymnastics and basketball.
Tell us what it means, Seb.
It means that the football club, the football arm of those clubs, has to be owned by the shares in it have to remain with the members of the club. So 50% plus one. It literally means 50% of the shares and one, so that they retain overall voting control of the club's future.
Mm-hmm. I'm ready to understand what it means now. Can you explain it?
It basically outlaws majority private membership. It means that you cannot have a Roman Abramovich who comes in and purchases the entire club and takes.
I'm ready whenever you are to start explaining it.
Hey, but the smart play here would just be to introduce the video that we did on this. I think that would be if
you want to hit up Tifo Football on the YouTube,
that would be nice.
You can watch our video about the 50+1 rule as it relates to RB Leipzig. There's also a video that was written by James Montague about German supporters and how different they are in terms of being politically engaged. So that was fun. Consequences. Let's talk about consequences now, because in my house there were never any consequences, and that's why I'm who I am. So I feel like we should have some here. To really bring down, I don't know what people have different parenting techniques, don't they? But I would dissolve them forever. What would you do, Alex?
This
is the big six, by the way, not Germany's political
seems
fans.
Like a great idea. I think it's really hard to. I don't know. I actually don't know. I mean, obviously, points deductions are a possibility.
Massive fines.
But what's the mechanism by which they're fined? I mean, there's
mugging.
These things have to happen within mugging. Yeah. So what? Just march Stan Kroenke to a cash point. I mean, that's probably.
I'm talking about consequences.
Idea. Yeah, the important consequences are going to be what happens to football hopefully particularly in the UK, but anywhere else, as a result of these sorts of reports. Tracy Crouch is a qualified, I can't remember if she's a qualified coach or referee, but she's somebody who actually understands football really quite well and is a good person to drive this. So it may be that the consequences don't directly affect the clubs this season in terms of points deductions or fines, but it redraws the landscape in a way which is much more positive for supporters in general. Of course, the other alternative is that all their trophies are melted down and made into little coins.
Seb, let me say to you, from the sounds of it, Alex wants to punish the fans, and I think he's missed the point a little bit. Seb, how would you go about specifically punishing the people who did the plot here, not the fans, as Alex wants to punish?
I think the punishment has to come from the Premier League, and I would look at forcing some kind of resignation or expulsion of these individual people. I don't see the value in punishing the clubs, because you're punishing all the wrong people. The architects of this situation are individual executives who've been sitting around in smoke-filled rooms for the last 18 months plotting something and lying to a lot of other people. Clubs haven't done that, players haven't done that, managers haven't done that. I thought Jurgen Klopp made a really good point. He lost his cool a little bit with Gary Neville towards the end of that segment, but it began with a really good point about, well, we didn't know about this until yesterday. That was on Monday night, and we're recording this on a Thursday morning. So you have to look at people like Kroenke, Daniel Levy, John Henry, Ed Woodward. Ed Woodward is gone, fine. But why should these people be allowed to remain inside the conversation? Why should they...
How does the Premier League remove them, though? They're the owners.
Well, it's already
of those
started
teams
the
in many
process.
cases.
It's already started the process. So the Premier League is obviously, it isn't just a single room with 20 people sitting around a big table. There are subcommittees and kind of sub-organisations which deal with kind of revenue splits, and they've already begun the process of kicking people out of those. And that's very important, but it has to go further. You have to make sure that amongst those 20 member clubs, there is a level of trust, and that level of trust cannot exist while people like Levy and Kroenke are in the room. It just can't, because within 24 hours of the Super League imploding, Agnelli's back on TV talking about, well, we're going to refine it, and Perez is doing the same. And it's like leading a coup against a king or a queen, and then being allowed to, you fail, but we'll go back to your castle and have a bit of a think about it. Try again next year. I agree with Alex in the sense that the mechanism is very difficult.
Would you put them in a cage at the top of the castle from the highest turret? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I'd like that. Yeah.
One thing I would say, and I take your point, Seb, about the fact that managers and players and clearly fans weren't consulted in all of this. But when there have previously been points deductions, clubs going into administration and so on, like it happened to Southampton, it's happened to Bolton Wanderers and Leeds and so on, the circumstances were exactly the same. The fans and players and manager didn't know about that either. And it feels like, yes, removing people from committees is actually a very practical and sensible plan, but it would also feel kind of unfair if these clubs were not punished in some other more overt way, because other clubs have had to suffer that fate for financial mismanagement and doing things badly, and to have a kind of an elite group who consider themselves so elite that they could break away, that don't then have a further sanction that is similar to those other clubs. Yes, it's unfair to fans. Yes, it's unfair to managers and players. But otherwise, it feels more unfair not to do something.
I agree. Think about the financial blow this would have caused to the game, right? And by example, the other examples that Alex brings up of teams that have been financially mismanaged, not as a result of their players or their fans or whatever. That's all damage to themselves, and then they get punished, for breaking the various financial regulations. These teams were going to do damage to other teams. They should be punished. They should have points deductions. Why not? I think to not do it is to just welcome them straight back into the role, exactly as you were saying there, Seb. I think there needs to be a very visceral, and they need to capitalise. Kick them when they're on the ground is what I'm saying. Like they're down, they're embarrassed, they look ridiculous. These
I thought they
executives,
were in a cage in a high tower.
They're in a cage in a high tower on the floor, looking ridiculous. There are all these different things. They should apply points deductions to the clubs. I'm sure there's probably no precedent for this, and so it's not as straightforward as all that. But do you agree with the concept of doing it, Seb?
I don't think it has a long-term effect. I think if you sanctioned a points deduction this season, so let's say for argument's sake, you deducted all of these teams 20 points and you removed them from, without looking at the table, I don't know, but presumably from all kind of European qualification. Okay, so you punish them for a year. Now, next year...
You pair it with longer-term punishments, but don't just ignore it because it's only short-term.
You can do, but I think the most important thing is that you remove the individual people. Because if you... I'm
sorry to interrupt you again, but you can remove them from the various committees around the Premier League and the subcommittees, as you say, and they have, many of them have left themselves their positions in the ECA when they thought that this was still going to be a goer. You can't take Manchester United away from Joel Glazer. There's nothing that the Premier League can do to get in between that, as far as I understand.
Yeah, no, I understand that.
So how can you remove them?
You remove individual decision makers. Joel Glazer isn't a decision maker in this situation. I mean, he is a owner of Manchester United, but the problem in these conversations has been Ed Woodward. I don't doubt for 1 second that he's been working on under the authority of Joel Glazer and to create a situation that the Glazers want to see, which was a kind of a locked Super League. But in the same way that Joe Lewis is not the public face of Tottenham, I don't know how you would remove Tottenham from Joe Lewis's control.
It's
but
all making sense now, Seb.
But
it's
I
all
understand.
making sense now.
What do you mean?
Producer Adonis has let me know. He's let me know that The Athletic revealed last night that Spurs aren't on any of those committees. And that's your real plan, isn't it? You just want to get all the other teams on.
I just want to see
and you don't
power.
want, no punishment for Spurs because you're a Spursite. Anyway,
Well,
that's
because
the thing,
if you punish Spurs, okay, so for instance, Tottenham are not going to finish in the Champions League places. So what is a 20-point deduction for them this season? Well,
it means they finish like in the bottom half of the table, and it's embarrassing, and we can all laugh at them and make fun of them forever.
But would you not think a more effective punishment is to remove Daniel Levy as chairman?
Yeah, but I guess so. But how can you do that?
Because
you can't do that.
Of course you can. These are Premier League clubs. You can ban people from running Premier League clubs. Of course you can.
The Premier League can obviously decide who sits on various committees.
No, but they can
I'm
also.
I'm pretty sure the Premier League cannot interfere with the running of a publicly traded business like that.
Yeah, but
That just doesn't seem plausible.
No, of course you can threaten a suspension of membership, but then at the same time it's like saying, yeah, but because these actions, this attempt to join a Super League is unprecedented, we don't have the mechanisms to issue any proper punishment, and therefore we just won't. Like it doesn't work like that because we are in a territory where this is not an appeal of a 5-game ban for a bad tackle. It is a situation which doesn't have legislation attached to it. There is no procedure to follow here. So just saying, well, Daniel Levy, we just don't know what to do with him, so you might as well just stay and continue. It's nonsense.
But how do you do that with John Henry or Joel Glazer, who might occupy those positions but also own the teams?
I have absolutely no idea. You need a smart financial person.
You could probably do that with Levy,
that.
right? Hypothetically, you could do that with Levy if you're correct. But you couldn't do that with the owners.
No, you couldn't do that with the owners.
You could potentially do...
Government could do that with the owners, but that is a very severe step.
Well, of course they'll never do that.
Yeah,
you could retrospectively say that they failed a fit and proper persons test, potentially, because what they did. I did read a thing the other day. There is something about the duty of companies to conduct themselves in a certain sort of way that benefits shareholders but also the community. If there's I think there is legislation that can be used to apply pressure, but I think until the government decides to ensure. I mean, what's interesting about 50+1 and also the way that Spanish football clubs are now owned, apart from the 4 that are still socio-owned, is that it was government legislation that created those vehicles and forced clubs, if they wanted to be part of a sporting federation, they had to adhere to those ownership models. So it is within government's power to be able to do that. But it would take a lot of time.
I don't pretend to know an awful lot about American sport, but there was a really good ESPN 30 for 30 series on their podcast about Donald Sterling and how it was that he came to be forced to sell the LA Clippers, the NBA franchise. Now, I understand it's a different model. The Premier League is not the same thing as the NBA, and actually the NBA is more comparable to something like what the proposed Super League. But leagues do have control and do have certain powers over people who run these organizations. So it's not without global precedent, this kind of situation.
Okay, I'm ready, Seb. What were you going to say? Should we reflect on how poorly this was launched? Because that's a funny part of it, wasn't it? The crap website, the bad branding, the garbled interview or interviews from Perez, and the silence from every other participating chairman. Just imagine thinking that you could go on telly and say, yeah, maybe we're gonna make football shorter if that's what the young people want. Like, we'll do what we want. It's innovative, isn't it? You idiot! You idiot!
I think it's just like capitalist hubris, isn't it? They have got themselves to a position of such wealth and influence where they have effectively been able to do whatever they've wanted to do, and they are so utterly convinced of the correctness of this idea. And weirdly, I think particularly with people like Perez and Agnelli, there's a kind of righteousness. They feel that they are saving football. in some
Do you
sort
think
of bizarre
also
way. But
because they have so much money, they must have made lots of correct decisions in the past, and therefore they
Well,
might be a bit biased about their ability to make right decisions. Do you know what I mean?
I think there's possibly something in that, although there is also, you know, just because you're rich doesn't mean you're clever. And
No, sure.
again, you know, Florentino Perez made a lot of money in construction, so maybe he's like an absolute ninja when it comes to construction, but that doesn't necessarily mean he understands football or crucially marketing. And I think this is the
He's
weird
a construction ninja.
thing that in a world that is so obsessed with narrative and the way that you sell things in the context of an incredibly responsive news cycle that will generate overreaction to things at the drop of a hat, these guys just basically kicked the door of the room down and went, we're going to piss on everything and you'll love it. And then were surprised when that didn't work.
I did kind of love it though. To be fair, while it lasted.
I mean, it was, don't get me wrong, it was funny, but it, you know, that literally any other undertaking of this sort, if it were done by anybody other than a bunch of incredibly rich, self-righteous, arrogant men, would have been carefully considered and planned and seeded. You know, the idea would be sort of creeping out, and they would consult with groups, and there would be messaging that would be about, this is how you save football, and in a different kind of way. Whereas
I think the joke with this is that they were prepared. Like, they spoke to this creative agency or this branding agency, started by someone semi-famous in that industry who worked with a lot of big names in politics before. They did prepare this stuff. Like, some of the assets were prepared, you know, months ago, and what I think the funny thing is that they didn't think that they needed to consider the things that you're saying. Do you know what I mean? I think it's even funnier to think that they probably did think about those things. They probably had conversations about them because they're not stupid people. But they didn't think they even needed to.
Yeah, but I think this is the problem when you've got a group that has been so preeminent within the sport for such a long time already. You know, Perez has been running Real Madrid for over a decade, and Yeli's family has owned Juve for over 100 years. You know, these guys think they have all the answers. So you could have a very bright PR company and a group of clever young things running around going, chaps, this is probably not the best way to do this. And they'll just sit back and go, yeah, sorry, we know better because I'm Andrea Agnelli. Of course I know better. You know, it's like there is no talking to people like that. Once they've set themselves on a path, they are just convinced that they're correct, and they don't need. I think this is the biggest single thing: is they didn't feel they needed to. And Perez coming out last night and saying all of these ridiculous things about match duration and attention spans and stuff. That's not a guy who's looked at the last 48-hour news cycle and gone, maybe I should temper my message. That's a guy who's gone, you're all fucking idiots. Yeah. I am doubling down because I'm the only one who understands it.
Well, the delusion I think there was like, you know when you're in a room with a small number of other people and you spend a long time in that room and you're talking about ideas, you get to a stage where you'll think any idea is amazing and is innovative and is modern, right? And is kind of risky and special and bold and these sorts of things. I do genuinely believe that he thinks he's excited about the idea of being able to reduce the length of a football game because maybe it'll make more money, right? He's excited about it. And he thinks, therefore, that is an example of something which could be described as innovative, modern, bold, punk thinking, you know, kind of like we need people like this in the game. We need people who are prepared to not close any of the doors, not make any assumptions about, or not leave anything unanswered, you know, look at everything. I do genuinely believe that he believes that. And I think that's a really good example of somebody who is probably extremely isolated from ordinary people, you know, because that's not, making it shorter isn't exciting, is it?
But also, Joe, if you were going to make a proposition like that, do you not think that maybe not on day one, but probably on like day 2 or day 3, you would present some kind of evidence of having talked to the people that you're referring to? Like it's a really weird thing that I think Florentino Perez is in his late 60s. Andrea Agnelli is in his late 40s. You've got these two guys talking about younger generations, and there's no evidence that they've actually been consulting with.
Well, they also don't understand the basic concept of it, right? Like, what's the point he was making? He was saying, "Oh, maybe we'll shorten the game." What to 80 minutes? You've missed the fucking point, mate. It's not that they can't watch 90 minutes, but they can watch 80. It's that they don't like to watch anything for a very long time. But it's not even. It's a complete misunderstanding of what, like, a sort of loose understanding of the truth would be anyway.
It's before you even get to the idea of understanding or not, Joe. It's like one of them has gone into a room with their grandchild and daughter, noticed them playing Fortnite, watched for 5 minutes, and then left and tried to recreate European football as a result of what they've seen.
Yeah.
It is absolute madness. There's actually,
Imagine if that was true, though. Imagine if humans had evolved.
Is it so far-fetched?
For 79 minutes they could pay attention, but that was it. That's all. They can't do any more than that.
But also, what is the actual evidence that this is the case? Just because people like TikTok, you can't necessarily extrapolate
video retention.
from that.
It's video retention, mate. Evidence does exist of lessening attention span. For sure it does. But it doesn't mean that you can answer that by...
If you want to...
Lessening attention span for certain types of content, sure. But I don't know. Are people literally being timed watching football matches?
But to be honest with you, like, I think this all kind of takes a step beyond the most fundamental point in the argument, which is if you want people to remain invested in football, isn't your first step not to create a European Super League with like 10 quarters each of like 8.5 minutes each? Isn't it to make sure that people can actually afford to fucking go? Like,
yeah.
Am I interested in football today unless I'm able to go to football as a child? Probably not, or at least probably not in the same way. So your emphasis is on making sure that you reach your future generations in that way first, and then maybe you have discussions about lessening attention spans.
They only want it on the telly, though, don't they? Isn't that the thing? Isn't that the thinking?
Yeah, but then in terms of sort of securing a lifelong stream of revenue from a single person who buys replica shirts and scarves and goes to matches, your avenue to that person is through getting them inside a stadium, whether it be home, away, on one of those global tours. Perhaps I don't like them, but I understand that as a mechanism. Like, it's hardly as if football has exhausted its attempts to make itself more affordable. I mean, maybe in Germany it does a good job of that, possibly. In England, it's laughed in the face pretty much of any kind of, I understand 20s Plenty has been a success, or has brought away ticket prices down, but in terms of going to your average Premier League game, like if you were a father of 2 or 3 and you wanted to take your sons and daughters, it costs you a small fortune. So how do you expect people to have a lifelong relationship with a game they can never actually go into a stadium and touch? It's ridiculous.
Burn them all down.
Melt it.
Go to non-league instead.
I read a James Horncastle article this morning, which on The Athletic, which is very, very good. But one of the details which made me laugh was that there was a meeting of Serie A chairman and presidents and owners on Tuesday, and apparently when Agnelli tried to speak, he was heckled by chants of Judas from the other people on the Zoom call.
Judas. That would have been so awkward as well, because you could only hear one person at a time, can't you?
Read the article, it's good. It's a really good article.
Yeah, The Athletic did some great stuff over the weekend.
Yeah.
BTW. Check it out.
Good Matt Slater article there as well.
Which one was that?
It's about what happens next. And that came out on Thursday morning. It's well worth your time.
Well, I've got no idea what happens next. Go and ask Matt Slater. For now, we'll be back in a moment to talk about what? Football? Football what? Spurs 2, 1 Southampton. This was classic Saints, writes Alex. Great first half, writes Alex. It was you, wasn't it, that wrote this?
It was me, yes.
Tell you what, you read it. Go on, pal.
Okay. I'll just
be bold.
With Armstrong doing well in an unfamiliar CM role.
That's right. Yeah.
You know,
I mean, I guess this made
more
sense
like you're convinced by what you've written. Just
before Ings getting injured forced a switch. Feels like we're treading water until it's this has been I know no one's interested in talking about Southampton. Even I'm not that interested in talking about Southampton, but for the first half we played really well, and Tottenham looked a little bit bereft of ideas, reminded me slightly of that very passive beginning of the season performance against Everton when everybody thought Everton were going to go on and win the Premier League. And then Ings went off injured and there were some changes. And it's just, I don't know, to me, Southampton's season feels slightly emblematic of this season as a whole, which is that it's been extremely up and down. It's been quite unpredictable. Injuries have played too significant a part, or the mental and physical strain on players has played too much of a part, and everybody basically just wants to get to the end now and sit down and have a break. Yeah,
I've got a big question for you, okay? Because I like Ralph Hasenhüttl mostly because of his name, because of the way he looks, and because I think he was at Leipzig. He must be a good coach.
He was the password for the old Tifo football Wi-Fi.
Yeah, misspelled.
That's true.
Misspelled,
of course.
So you didn't love his name that much.
As an added security measure.
I always look at him and think he's good. And also he's at Southampton, right? So I always look at him and think he's going to be in charge of Tottenham or at Manchester United in a few years' time. He's the next big thing. And then a season like this happens. Last season was sort of topsy-turvy as well. Am I sort of getting caught, do you think, by the whole sort of the whole look and feel of Hasenhüttl? When the substance doesn't appear to quite be there to tally with what my expectations are, Alex. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I completely understand what you're saying, and it's a conversation that's bubbling around Southampton supporters a lot as well. I think the answer is no, he is still really good. And I think if you look at the way that Southampton played after the restart and at the beginning of this season, when a Ralph team is playing well, it's capable of producing really good, exciting football, beating anybody. There's almost no one that we haven't got a good result against in the last sort of calendar year. I think the issue is that the squad is terribly thin. There has been a litany of poor recruitment decisions at Southampton stretching back over the last 3-4 years, really. And so his teams need to be refreshed and reset, otherwise they run out of steam. And that just hasn't been an option for him. I think if he went somewhere with a deeper squad, with more of a... he's trying to sort out the path back into the first team for academy players, and he's set this plan out for the whole of the club. That will obviously take time to come to fruition. But yeah, he's still very good, and he should end up managing somewhere better than Southampton. I wouldn't judge too much on what's happened in the second half of this season.
Okay. Seb, 2 minutes on Spurs, please, without Mourinho, because they won a game of football, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. It was kind of it demonstrated the good and the bad of sort of post-era relaxation. Mourinho goes, everyone sighs, and you get players who aren't as inhibited anymore, but also a little bit slack. And I think you saw the full rainbow from Spurs. There's a lot of kind of careless defending. Southampton probably gone into half-time 2 up, maybe 3 up. Hugo Lloris played very, very well. But there were some interesting moments in the second half, like get into play between the attacking players. Really liked what the fullbacks did. It doesn't mean anything. It's not necessarily related to what will happen next week or the week after or whatever. But it was really nice to see a reversal of a trend. Spurs have spent all season surrendering leading positions and dropping points, and they came back from 1-goal deficit to win it late. It was more than welcome, I'll be honest.
But also, was this your first match piece for the Athletic, Seb?
No, I did one just before I left England.
Oh, well.
So it was a bit of a strange feeling because I haven't done one for a very, very long time. But it was, it was fun. I actually really enjoyed that second half. As a fan, I'm not talking about sort of the writing experience of it. I just really enjoyed seeing them come back and win. It was good.
Yeah. Well, if you want to read Seb's piece, you can do so at The Athletic. Enjoy that. Right, I think that's probably it for today. We've rambled our way through some response to the Super League. How does one even respond, in the face of calamity and embarrassment? Well, we did our best.
I've got a fancy football update for you.
Hello.
Well, I haven't. It's not so much an update. It's just more of a notification that I've overtaken you in the league table.
No,
Yeah.
hold on.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. Yeah.
We haven't got time to do any more of the podcast.
Yeah.
Can't hear anything that you're saying, mate. You aren't important to me. I don't like you. I don't even think you're good at your job. I've been keeping these things
put some
inside
bass in that bit
for a long time.
Just really.
And also, I
just
think
fade him out during this as well.
I actually think that your parents made a mistake having you. And I think, I've met your father once and he admitted to me that he was deeply ashamed of you and he wished he could go back and not have birthed you specifically because of how bad you would be at fantasy football. You'd never overtake a good boy like me. So, not true, don't believe you. I'm going to make a super club.
Can't prove it.
I've made a super club and you're not invited. Right, T-Pose, thanks to everyone for listening today. Hope you're well, hope you're enjoying dancing in the world beyond the league and laughing at the wealthy people. It's not often we get to laugh at the rich people, is it? But we can today. So do have a good old chortle, a deep laugh, yeah? Bring things out of your lungs that have been there for 10 years or so and just enjoy it because you'll have to go back to rational, non-othering thinking tomorrow. So, enjoy it while it lasts. Alex Stewart, thanks to you.
Thanks, Joe.
And thanks, of course, to producer Adonis. He was really on it today. He was great. I think that's everyone. T-Pose, au revoir, and we'll be back next week with more football talk, hopefully.
The Athletic.